Now, to kind of set the scene for the big picture, we've got a great video message from Saul Griffith, big thinker, master craftsman of the Electrify Everything plan.
Hi, I'm Saul Griffith. I'm the author of The Big Switch. I'm founder of Rewiring Australia, also Rewiring America, and I'm a huge advocate for demand-side electrification as our nearest term opportunity for massive climate action. And I'm very bullish on the Australian opportunity for electrification of our communities as a big climate solution. I actually worked a whole bunch in the USA over the last couple of years writing the Inflation Reduction Act. We did that so that every American household will get about $20,000 in incentives to help electrify the car, electrify the water heater, electrify the space heater, electrify their kitchen, solar on the roof, battery on the side of the house. The good news is in Australia, that recipe works and works even better because we have very cheap Australian rooftop solar and sunshine. And I'm an advocate for helping every community in Australia make their own plans and to do that transition. So I applaud you and your local member Allegra for your interest as a community in this near-term climate solution opportunity. I think one of the extraordinary things you're going to find out is it's going to be wonderful for not only the economics of the households in your community, but wonderful for the economics of the whole community. And just to paint you a little picture of what is good about this, I live in a postcode called 2515. There's about 4,000 households in that postcode. We spend about $20 million a year on petrol and diesel. If those households all had electric vehicles instead and were charging at least half of it on sunshine that we generate in our community, we'd be saving that $20 million a year and reinvesting it in our community. And if you think about how many new school classrooms that could create, gold plating the Surf Lifesaving Club, putting solar on the roof of the RSL, this is an extraordinary opportunity for Australian communities to help themselves while also helping climate and helping the members of their family breathe cleaner air in their houses and in their communities.
So thank you, Allegra, and to Honourable Gabriel Upton, thank you as well, and to the three mayors. Today I'm just going to quickly give you a bit of a rundown on Wentworth's emissions profile. And it sounds, when you talk about emissions, it sounds like this big, nebulous, confusing concept, and I just want to try and break it down and simplify it a bit so we sort of know what we're talking about. And that's going to help us sort of really target our efforts to reducing emissions. So our emissions really come predominantly from electricity as the major source, and this is the power that we use in our homes every day, in our buildings for our appliances, hot water, heating and cooling. But also you can see waste and transport are also pretty major contributors to our emissions profiles. And then when we break it down by sort of sector and subsector, you can see 27%, the largest piece of the pie, actually has come from multi-unit dwellings, which are apartments, but also there's a significant portion from retail, health as being a major industry in our area, and commercial. These are commercial offices. So really interesting contributors. All of this data is specifically for Wentworth, so you can rely on it. And when you sort of look at the proportion of emissions, you can see why the amount coming from apartments isn't that surprising when you look at the dwelling types. So we really do have a lot of a variety of dwelling types. A lot of sustainability efforts and services are targeted at detached and attached dwellings. So they assume you own your own home and you live in a house. But what we really find is that most of our residents live in multi-unit dwellings, and we've got really significant proportions of renters. So look, it makes doing sustainability improvements to your home a lot more difficult, but it's just important to know that Wentworth isn't like the rest of Australia in many ways. It's got specific unique factors that make it challenging. So are we winning? Well, yes and no. Emissions have declined about 10% over the last 8 years, but where our emissions aren't decreasing fast enough. If we want to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees by 2030, we need to reduce emissions by 46%, which is the red line. So we've only got about 8 years to get there. So we need to go further, faster. This is a really interesting piece of information as well. It's our emissions spatially. So this is emissions per person across the Wentworth local government, electorate. You can see that there's some definite patterns, and they're really correlated to dwelling size, how big your house or apartment is, and access to transport. You can see a bit more clearly here when you look at car emissions per person, that sort of correlation, and it's really how far you live from major public transport routes and your reliance on vehicles. And very interestingly enough, you can see that the impacts of climate change are also unequal across Wentworth. When you look at tree canopy, there are suburbs with 80% less tree canopies than other suburbs, and that means that they're going to need more heating and cooling, which contributes to more climate change, and it becomes a vicious cycle, essentially. Couple more slides to sort of finish off. This is some really interesting data on the solar uptake in Wentworth. You can see that we're a bit below average here of the rest of the local government areas in Sydney. We did some modelling, and we found that it's not because residents of Wentworth don't care about solar and don't want to put in their homes. It's not because they're so rich and solar doesn't make a difference to their electricity bill. When you actually break it down and look at the data and the modelling, it's because of the size of our dwellings, the fact that we have so many people in apartments and renters. It's the topography of our area being quite hilly, the heritage overlays. They're the most important contributors, not solar. Not money or not anything to do with desire or interest, I should say. Doesn't mean that we give up on solar. It just means we have to be smarter about how we roll it out in our electorate. And final slide, this is a positive one. So if solar isn't, we're not the leaders, electric vehicles, we definitely are. So this is one area where Wentworth residents are leading the charge, pardon the pun. EVs are doubling on our road every single year. It's an amazing stat. In 1 year, the number of EVs double. And as council, we're looking at ways to enable greater uptake of EVs, and we have a network of EV charging stations, and we're encouraging a whole bunch more. So we're really looking forward to working with you, Allegra, and all levels of government, and really pushing that out. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, Kirsten needs a Oh, great. No worries. All right. Thank you, Anthony. We'll hear from Anthony in just a second. Kirsten, do you want to come up and sorry, Kristen, do you want to come up and do your presentation? This is Kristen runs Electrify 2515, and it's a great story about how a local area is leading Australia to basically electrifying everything. Take a look.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. I did wonder whether I was invited to kind of bring the gender diversity to the panel, but I'm really privileged either way to feel like I'm in such a esteemed kind of company in this area. I'm from Electrify 2515, and we're a local community group down in beautiful Darawal country. So I live in Thurrool. It's about an hour south of here. I used to live in Bondi for a long time. There's a lot of similarities and enjoyment and connection to our coastal community. We're volunteers, we're local members of our kind of area, and we all have kids, we all have jobs, and we all actually just share a collective concern for the climate crisis. So, you know, I don't know about you, but for me, you know, for many years I suffered a lot of climate despair, particularly with a huge vacuum of leadership on the issue. And I guess it wasn't until I came across Saul's work, and it really kind of didn't just provide some hope, but it really provided a practical blueprint that we could kind of implement that's immediate and that is really impactful. And it's something that gives the power back to individuals and communities to create change. So we're trying to create a net zero emissions community down in 2515. You guys are actually ahead of us in a lot of ways. We have a lot less uptake of things like EVs and EV infrastructure, but we're trying to work out how we can go about it. And when we kind of gathered together, I should say that, as Saul touched on, the reason why this can actually work and Australian communities are so fortunate is that we have the world's cheapest power. here. So on our roofs, and that doesn't just have to be your own roof, it can be access to other roofs. The fact that we can put rooftop solar so cheaply means we can actually be saving a lot of money on our power bills today. And just, I guess, complementing Anthony's work, when you combine when you're looking at our overall in Australia, our domestic emissions, which make up about 60% of our national emissions, if you're looking at households and commercial, so things like our local businesses and our schools, when you're combining that with the transport that we all use, we actually can make an impact on about 70% of household emissions and commercial emissions, so our community's emissions, which is huge. So, this isn't about just putting the heavy lifting onto individuals. It's about if everybody did something and we worked together as a community, we would actually be having really significant change. And as Saul kind of mentioned, the premise is about using more energy efficient appliances in our home, and those appliances then to be powered by renewable energy. When we sat around a pub as a group and kind of thought, do people even care about this as much as we did? We kind of started it out, and we were put out a sort of a registration of interest, and people had to complete a survey whether they would be willing to embark on an electrification journey with us. We set ourselves a goal of 500 households over kind of 3 months. We got 500 households in 4 days. We now have about nearly 1,200 people who have signed up and are ready to go, and that's a quarter of our community. In South Australia, one of the kind of government-led energy agencies there are trying to do something similar, and they've had about a 1% response rate, and it's kind of showing that for us at 25%, community is really impactful. It's really powerful. We've all got local connections and networks. We can provide sort of trusted sources of information and kind of compel each other to do something big. So we also surveyed people about what are sort of the barriers about why they haven't really gone about doing this themselves. Of course, cost is a huge issue, but a really important part for us to remember is that a lot of people don't necessarily know enough about various items. So, for instance, when you're thinking about your hot water system, some people might not be aware that if you used a heat pump water system, you would actually be using about 1/3 to 1/4 of the energy of your standard gas or electric system. In dollar terms, if you're looking at the lifespan of that appliance over 10 years, of looking at the running cost, you would be spending roughly about $3,600 on a gas or electric appliance. If it was a heat pump charged from the solar from your roof, you'd be spending $400 over 10 years. It's a similar story if you're looking at heating or cooling your home using a split cycle reverse cycle air conditioning system, or a split cycle system. It's the same thing. Uses about 1/3 to 1/4 in dollar terms. We're going from nearly $5,000 over 10 years to $1,400. Cooking, a lot of people feel really emotionally connected to their gas cooktop, and I think the gas industry has done a fantastic job at that marketing. There's a recent kind of campaign that's been launched by Global Cooks Coalition, and it has people like Neil Perry. If he can convert his whole kitchens to using induction cooktop, I think I can, make my 2-minute noodles off it. So there's change there, but probably the biggest impact is your car. This is really quite remarkable in terms of the same type of car uses 1/3 to 1/4 of their energy if it's electric. So, our Ford Rangers and our Toyota Hiluxes, which are the most common cars in Australia, if you had a Rivian Ute, I wouldn't personally, but it actually uses way less energy, 1/4 of the same kind of power. And in dollar figures, you would be spending about $15,000 over 10 years on your car. If you charged it off your solar panels from your own roof or from some sort of community source, you'd be spending $800 over 10 years to run that car, the energy used. So it's a huge difference. Of course, it's not just about EVs. This is me and my 3 monkeys. We get around a lot on our electric bike, and public transport and all the other alternative transports are very, very important. But altogether, if all these 6 kind of items were in your own home, we'd be looking at the average household of saving between $3,000 and $5,000. For lower middle income households, this is huge impact. It's not always this easy. I know you're probably sitting there going, okay, that's all very well and good, but as Anthony said, we're a renter, we live in an apartment, the upfront costs are huge, we have shade, there's no capacity. But in our area, this is where we are. The Illawarra Escarpment actually provides a lot of shade, and a lot of individual homes can't put solar on their roofs. But if we actually had 80% of the homes with a decent sized solar capacity, we would be powering more than enough homes in our area, more than 100%. And so it's about kind of changing the access and the way we use energy. So there's a lot more shared or collective sources of energy. And this is actually what we're trying to do as a community. When it comes to things like affording these, the upfront cost, this is actually quite good in the sense that the technology is there. What we need now is for our government and political leaders to actually support households to overcome those financial barriers, because this is just a financial issue here, and if we can spend $11 billion on fossil fuel subsidies, we can definitely be spending a lot of money supporting households to be implementing these sorts of things. And so I'll just finish off on saying that it is about what you as an individual can do, but even more important is harnessing our collective power as a community. We are all kind of have networks here to create change. So these are the sorts of things we're trying to do down in 2515. We're trying to look at community solar arrays, and this is going to help those who are renters, those who are in apartments, accessing to like community batteries. We're also investigating starting an energy co-op, trying to look at cheaper energy, bulk purchasing of appliances, lobbying and vetting and organising local installers so we can provide kind of a trusted source of information. And I guess if you're walking away today thinking, what can I do? I would suggest the first thing is just to get started. The savings really speak for themselves in the long term if you can afford some of those upfront costs. There's also rebates available, and Gabrielle alluded to some of them. I would recommend the New South Wales heat pump rebate's a good one. Get your green power, 100% green power definitely, and look for companies that don't actually get any sources of their energy from fossil fuels. Look into solar farms and gardens, and these are kind of ways of communities accessing solar, working together. So I really believe in collective power, and I think that we can all do that. And that is not so the individuals are doing the heavy lifting, it's so that we can get our leaders to actually be creating serious change. So these are all the sorts of things that I'm asking, and hopefully you are also asking your political leaders to do. So Allegra's mentioned some of them, things like fuel efficiency standards. To get more EVs, we need concessional finance available to help renters. We need a whole lot of subsidies and incentives to get kind of household electrification happening. And it's up to us to make sure that our leaders actually do that, because as an individual household, we can have a difference. As a community, we can really create serious change. And if you roll that across Australia, that's where we're talking about wonderful legacy for our future generations.
Thank you, Kristen McDonald. That was great. You can hang on to that. And could John, Kristen, and Anthony and Tim just grab a chair and bring it up on stage? And sure, I'll hang on to that. There you go. And grab a chair. We'll move on to our panel quickly. Excellent. And because I'm already short, I'll just sit down here. It's really good. There you go. I'm like at the kiddies table. It's very exciting. All right, so we've got this great panel of brains up here today. I'm very excited to invite John Grimes, CEO of the Smart Energy Council, right here in the middle here. Anthony Weinberg, you've heard before. Yes. Regional Development Manager of Waverley. Great slides, Anthony, really good. Probably only beaten by Kristen's slides, which were very well designed, Kristen. Thank you, Kristen. And we've got Tim Buckley, who is the Director of Climate Energy Finance. Please give a round of applause for our panel. One thing I did notice in Kristen's slides is the $15,000 you'd save on your Ford Ranger. That was based on a $1.50 petrol price, and I had a good laugh. I was like, those were the days, wasn't it? Wasn't it amazing? All right, folks. Well, let's get this panel underway. We're running a little late, so we'll speed it up. This is a fascinating group of folks, big brains here. Let me ask you the big question: how do we get our emissions down in Wentworth? Let's start with building emissions. Who wants to take that one? Maybe Kristen, you want to take that one? Building emissions?
I can, Kristen? Yep, sure, okay. Building emissions, well, it's about innovation. So we just heard Kristen say that you can buy your energy from zero emissions energy sources. So actually getting energy in. we've got companies that here in the room that can sign you up for a zero upfront cost solar and batteries. But another innovation here in particular, Dan, is one of our member companies called Ilic. And what they do is they put a big solar system on a multi-apartment rooftop, and they allow every owner of every apartment to own a piece of that and retrospectively actually sell the energy to each other. And that's a great way to cut emissions with existing building stock transitioning going forward.
Great. Can we get brain replacements for landlords too? Mine won't even come around and clean the mould. That's very adventurous. Well, I jumped at quite a bit ahead here, John. I wanted to actually start with you. When it comes to net zero, can you give us a quick definition of what net zero means?
Well, fossil fuels have powered the advancement of our economy. They've improved our standard of living. They've built the society that we see today. And if we keep using them, they're going to destroy everything that we've built. They're going to destroy our health. They're going to destroy our economy. And so what we need to do is cut those emissions drastically. Net zero means that we've got to get that level down to the lowest possible amount possible. And then for the small amount that we can't get down, that we still need to use some emissions creating technologies for, then we need to offset and pull out of the system an equivalent amount of emissions so that overall the system is in net zero, is in balance.
Yeah. All right. Now, Tim, let's quickly look at the global picture. You're someone that's got their finger on the pulse of all things money and how money works in the global scheme of things. What does it look like?
Thanks, Dan. I think Anthony made the comment we need to go further and faster, and we started this year with Putin's now failing invasion of Ukraine, and the fossil fuel industry said, oh, maybe this is going to be the perfect excuse, we can delay action on climate change. And the International Energy Agency has said, no, that is absolutely the opposite of what's going to happen. We're going to have demand destruction of fossil fuels and acceleration of decarbonisation because energy security is now paramount to the well-being of every country and every person in the world. So further, faster is absolutely needed, 100%, but Putin's invasion has actually accelerated global action. So a couple of data points. Repowering EU is a huge multi-100 billion euro program of investment, 45% renewables by 2030, a doubling of the install of heat pumps, mandated rooftop solar everywhere. Then we saw a couple of months ago President Biden come out with his Inflation Reduction Act. Now that is 370 billion, but the DOE, the Department of Energy, has another $250 billion. So $750 billion US, all about accelerating the space race. And everyone says, the Murdoch media says that China's the global laggard. I'll just say that's crap for present company. The Chinese will install 5 times as much renewables this year as America will, number 2. So let's look some facts.
Put that in your Wentworth Courier and smoke it.
Absolutely. And finally, India. Let's not forget India. It's going to be the largest country in the world by population. It's the 3rd or 4th largest electricity market in the world. Prime Minister Modi, for the last 7 years, has been talking about 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. It's all about energy security. So all 4 major regions in the world, massive competition now, and I would actually argue we have a global space race. So the trend to decarbonisation is absolutely there. We just saw last night the Victorian election. That was a mandate from the people of Victoria, 95% renewables by 2035. It's a state race, it's a local council race, and it's a federal race against every other region in the world.
Yes, I hear Dan Andrews is promising net zero level crossing announcements before 2050, which is very exciting. I can't wait to no longer hear about that. Anthony, you gave a great presentation just before about Wentworth's own emissions. Where is the most surprising gap when it comes to emissions? Where we know about households and transport, but is there kind of a mystery element to emissions that people don't often think about for our electorate?
No. Oh yeah, it's working. Look, the biggest blind spot for Wentworth, undoubtedly, is apartments, and and people who rent in apartments. As I said, all of what you see is very suited. If you live in a house there's really no excuse. You can rooftop solar, heat pump hot water, EV in the garage. If you live in an apartment and you rent, your challenges are so much greater, so much more pressing, and there's a lot less you can do and quickly access. So until we get bigger, we need to offer greater incentives for apartment, greater facilitation. It just isn't going to happen without layers of government all working together and proper, business cases and economic signals. Because companies, it's difficult. Like Strata is the fourth layer of government, is what it's often described as, and it is difficult working with the Strata and the people on the Strata committee. They all have different interests, different values. And it's really pertinent that we sort of do work on this apartment emissions sector.
Which is why I'm going on strike with all of my fellow renters. Allegra. Yeah. Allegra's saying that 18% waste is a big emissions problem for Wentworth. What does that look like?
Yeah, so this is the collection of waste, the transportation of it to, say, Woodlawn on the south coast, and then the treatment and disposal of waste. It's a pretty big proportion, and it's increasing, as Allegra identified, so it's actually going up. When we move to FOGO, look, it's great for reusing the product and having food organics being collected and then returned so they can be used as compost on people's gardens. But in terms of emissions, actually doesn't make that much of a difference. But one thing I do recommend is you get a worm farm or a compost bin through our 3 councils. You can basically compost 60-70% of your organics, and we're giving them out free today, which is amazing. Otherwise they're heavily subsidized, but you'll be surprised, even if you live in an apartment and you just have a few plants, you can compost and worm farm. We've got a whole range of different products, and it's a great way of making sure your waste doesn't have to be transported and treated somewhere else.
John?
Dan, this water bottle has served me well for about 20 minutes, and it will take 450 years to break down. 15 generations, right? Single-use plastics is nuts.
That's all you wanted to say on that one? I thought you were going to take 450 years to tell us about it. What are you guys doing in Thirroul in terms of waste? Is there a waste component to Electrify 2515?
There isn't. There's definitely waste components as part of our council. We have a FOGO system as well. I think it's not about one issue being more important than the other. There's just so many different parts of the pie that we could all be tackling, and for some of us it's about going for the biggest parts of that pie. But when it comes to waste, general reduction of consumption for everybody is essential, not just relying on recycling and reuse. I mean, the collapse of the soft plastic recycling has been absolutely mortifying for me. I'm sure for a lot of you as well, feeling like you're doing the right thing. So those sorts of systems really need to be put into place.
Yeah, the reduction element is often not spoken about when it comes to emissions, but it's such a key element. All right, so what is the best way for our electorate to get emissions down? Maybe Anthony, you want to...
Look, in a nutshell, if you have access to your roof, put solar on it. Otherwise, you're wasting an asset. Put solar on your roof. Buy an EV. Next time you are looking at a car, there's a whole bunch of new vehicles coming out, and they're becoming more and more cost effective. Look, reduce what you consume, and you don't need as many things as you think in your life. This reduction component is huge. And next time, have a plan. Just like people in the country have a bushfire emergency plan. Gabrielle talked about having a household plan. Have a plan for when your hot water breaks. What are you going to replace it with? Be prepared to have the electrical connection there, to put in a heat pump. Be prepared when your heating goes to get an efficient model. So next time your stove breaks, look at induction. So get electrification ready is the main thing you can do. Don't do these panic decisions when you need, your stove or your hot water's gone. Be prepared, be planned. It's the best thing you can do, I think.
Succession planning, yeah. You got to pick your Lachlan Murdoch. Tim, let's talk about money. Wentworth, rich electorate, people have money, they use their money to do stuff. where do people put their money, and how can people use their money in a smarter way to get emissions down?
Yeah, maybe just building on the discussion about property. To me, we have the best neighbours rating system for commercial property in the world. I have wondered for a decade why we don't do that on residential property. So at the end of the day, what moves the world is money. If you had to sell your house, you'd get a pest inspection. If you were mandated that when you're selling your house, you got a neighbours rating, and that was publicised, mandated, all of a sudden, whether your house is 2-star, 4-star or 8-star, would make a dramatic difference. And the CSIRO has actually done some studies on this already, on more than 1 million data points, saying that you can get $120,000 uplift on the value of your house, depending on how many ratings you've got. Now, that comes to the rental market. If it's mandated, what's going to move the owner of a rental property? They get a capital uplift when they go to sell or when they have to buy. So I would say that is where government meets private interest. You've got to have that regulated, you've got to have it mandated, and that will then change every landlord's decision, and that then combines with having a plan to decarbonise as your water heater breaks. But that then builds the ecosystem, so you've actually got electricians who actually are trained in electric water heater pumps and induction cookers.
I love that. That's great, Anthony.
I've got another one. We realise that there are lots of apartment dwellers and renters, but everyone has an electricity meter and everyone pays an electricity bill. So one thing we're doing as 3 councils, and with a bunch of other 9 councils, is scoping out how we can give you, our residents and small businesses, a renewable energy offering that's direct from solar and wind, just like councils signed on to a PPA, it's called, where you buy power directly, power purchase agreement. How can we make that accessible for our residents and small businesses, take that model that works on a big scale and aggregate it down and get our residents and small businesses a cheaper, hopefully, but much greener renewable energy offer.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. So good. I've learnt so many things already this morning, like the idea of driving an EV in a T3 lane. Oh my God, that blew my brain. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? This is ridiculous. Of course, I'm a renter, so I can't fucking plug it in at anything, so it's okay. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm okay about that. Let's talk about EVs and transport. John, what is some of the easiest ways we could reduce our emissions through transport?
Well, we've got to get more and cheaper EVs in Australia, and I'm really pleased to say that Allegra is actually leading the charge on this at a federal level. And there's a great company here today, the Good Car Company, right?
Company,
so
yep.
Actually bringing in used electric vehicles from Japan and other jurisdictions into the Australian market, get that second-hand fleet going, because we can't all afford to drive a Tesla, even though we'd love to. So that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, my question is, what do you rename a petrol head? Do you rename them Volt heads? Is that what you do now? Tim, you want something on transport?
Yeah, again, maybe just to bring up China, the world leader in decarbonisation. I mean, again, we hear the Murdoch press attack China all the time. It's just ludicrous. China's EV sales this year up 115% year on year. They will sell, they are selling in August, it was 29.4% of all passenger sales were EVs, where we've just doubled to 2%. Yeah, so we are so far behind China. China will be 60% of the world's EVs. So just to stress the point, this is a technology race. I think President Biden has finally realised, or I think he realised quite a long time ago, thanks to Saul Griffith, but he's convinced the American public that putting $750 billion of capital is actually necessary to drag America into the technology space race.
Yeah, and that's where what China's doing is actually leading the world in that as well, which is amazing. So there's a couple of other companies here as well. Tesla's here, and BYD Motors are here as well, a prominent Chinese EV company. So go check them out as well. In a moment, we'll have questions. So if you've got a question for our panel, don't worry about that. We'll get to you in a second. But back on money, Tim, like for people who have super and investments, is where they have their money, is that an important aspect when it comes to emissions reduction?
Absolutely. We have a thing called the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero Emissions. It's a pledge by, I don't know, a group of financial institutions that manage $150 trillion of capital collectively. They've pledged to 1.5 degrees. Now, it's a pretty amazing pledge. We need to hold them to account. Almost all our financial institutions are in that pledge. We need to actually ask them, what are you doing? Where's your interim target? Where's your 2030 data? How are you going? And stop. Are you funding any new fossil fuel developments at all anywhere in the world? Because the IEA says that's not compatible with 1.5 degrees. So hold the boards to account. You can do that individually by asking, go into your branch, ask not the teller, but ask to speak to the manager about it. Make it a management problem. And I can tell you, I know because I advise the banks, that goes straight to the board. If market forces are a pain in the arse, but they're brilliant because they'll get 20 people to do it. And when 20 people do it, that goes straight to the board of our major banks because it gets to a top 3 issue of the day, of the week, of the month, of the year, as it has to be.
Yeah, Kristen.
I love market forces. Yeah, I think what we do with our money is really important. Like, we often just go and put it in our bank, put it in our super, and kind of feel like we're really detached from what happens. But those institutions are incredibly powerful in the game in terms of where they're investing that money. And so I definitely have gone to, any bank I've had, any kind of where I get my super or my mortgage, and ask them, do you invest in fossil fuel companies? If they do, see you later. I'm going. So, and there's plenty of kind of guides and stuff online that you can look at which institutions don't invest in fossil fuel kind of industries.
And some of the most surprising super funds do invest in fossil fuels, like Host Super, for instance. The one that I'm with actually increased its stakes in fossil fuels over the last year. So, folks, any questions in the room? Yes, down here. Yes. This is something John touched on and Anthony touched on. How are we going to charge electric vehicles with solar electricity if we live in an apartment?
Great question. The 3 councils have established New South Wales' first EV charging network back in 2019. There's 11 publicly available charging stations around the eastern suburbs. That's going to go to 35 in the next 12 months. And we're also working on EV charging hubs, so people do not have to walk more than 250 metres to be able to charge their cars around.
And smart poles.
Exactly. So there's EV charging on smart poles, EV charging hubs, EV charging curbside. So there's a whole range of charging.
Allegra.
I just wanted to say that that's also the next area that we as a group of local, state and federal members said that we're going to focus on is what is our plan for EV charging, because I think it's a really crucial issue, and everything that you're talking about, where we are an area of renters and apartment dwellers. We are not, we don't have all, driveways and garages. So it's absolutely crucial, and it's got to be part of, I think it's a sort of top priority for this community action.
Thank you, Allegra. That's very exciting.
If I could just say a word, Woollahra Council, in conjunction with the Rotary Club of Rose Bay, is having an information evening on Tuesday night at Woollahra Golf Club, 6 o'clock for 6:30, on this very subject of charging EV readiness in apartment buildings. So if you want, speak to Woollahra Council representatives here, and they will have the information as to how to arrange your presence there.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. Yes, down here with the sweater, with the great thing, with the thing on the great sweater there. Love that sweater.
Hi, my name's Rosanna Iacono. I'm a North Bondi resident, and I'm also managing partner for a sustainability consultancy. So my question is for the panel, but also for our elected representatives. What we've seen in 2 of the presentations is we've got a dichotomy between, yes, we want to move to transportation that is electrified, but we have a very densely populated area that we live in with the apartments. And the dichotomy is we are building more multi-unit buildings, and we are going to have congestion if we only move to electric vehicles. We need mass transportation solutions. So what are we doing about extending our underground rail from Bondi Junction all the way through Bondi, through Dover Heights, all the way to Watson's Bay, so we can move people in mass solutions, rapid mass solutions, so that we're not all jumping into EVs.
Great question for someone that takes 40 minutes often to get out of Bondi to get to the junction. Anthony, I guess this is you.
So active transport is number one on the hierarchy. Absolutely number one. So walking, public transport, shared mobility, and they're all biking, exactly. So that's our priority, and that's our focus as councils, as government. In terms of public transport, there's always more we can do. I'm not sure about heavy rail all the way out to an underground rail all the way out to Watson's Bay, but I think better bus services are always appreciated and better public transport.
John?
Now, quick shout out to the New South Wales government actually building massive renewable energy zones in New South Wales, the transmission lines to unlock the massive solar and wind potential of this state, big batteries on the network so we can get clean energy actually powering everything we do, whether you're in an apartment or not.
Very good. Let's do two more. We'll do three more. Up here, the chambray shirt. We're going to hear the... Go right up the back there, Wayne. Yep.
Hello. Hi, my name's Mitchell. I live in Double Bay, and I currently work for Planet Arc. I was just wondering, we've mentioned a lot about solar panels and whatnot, and thank you to the panel as well. It's been really insightful to talk so far. I guess I was wondering with solar panels, there's been some news recently about recycling solar panels and product stewardship for solar panels. I guess I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, and maybe from a council perspective and local community perspective, any challenges you see with recycling of solar panels after their end life.
End of life for solar panels. John, this is your remit.
We can't take an energy problem and turn it into a waste problem, right? So we, as an industry, as a community, we have to have a holistic solution. That means that solar panels must be collected, they must be recycled. There's a lot of valuable, there's aluminium, there's silver, there's a bunch of things in there that are really valuable, so that has to be part of our plans. It does mean we have to work with local government to have landfill bans in place, but we also have to have the infrastructure so people can cheaply and easily feed them into the stream, and we'll have some more news on that very shortly.
Tim?
Yeah, I was at a brilliant critical minerals summit in Sydney on Friday. New South Wales government, the federal government, everyone's speaking about the massive opportunity for critical minerals driven by EVs and driven by decarbonisation. But one of the key points is that lithium at the moment has a 5% recycling rate. So exactly, we can't, as John said, turn it into a waste problem. But I have studied batteries for 30 years, and I'd remind you, lead acid batteries, 95% global recycling rate. Why? The lead is valuable, the acid is toxic, regulation has to set the scene, it has to be mandated.
One final question up the back here before we wrap up.
Thank you. My name's Kirsten. I'm from an organisation called Beyond Zero Emissions. And just on the recycling thing, what we say to people we work with is when you buy your heat pump or your rooftop solar, ask about the end of life plan. And I know that Tindo Solar, which is a South Australian organisation, makes solar PV in Australia and has a 98% recycling plan, including selling the glue back to industry. And Printed Solar is here today, and that's currently powering a Tesla around Australia, so you can roll it out and get your charge wherever you are. And they are 100%, or they claim 100% recycling. So I just thought it was worth remembering to ask what happens next with the solar you put on your roof.
All right, thank you. That is it for our panel. Please thank Tim, Anthony, John, and Kristen. Super interesting. Thank you so much. These brains are here. Go attack them with your questions.